Reaching 300 strikeouts in the 1990s wasn't just borderline impossible, it was career suicide. This was the decade of offensive explosions, juiced balls, and hitters who could turn on any mistake pitch and send it 450 feet into the upper deck. Pitchers were getting absolutely shelled left and right. ERAs were skyrocketing across the league, and front offices were becoming obsessed with pitch counts and protecting their million-dollar investments. The numbers tell the story of just how brutal this era was for pitchers. In 1987, the league-wide ERA was 4.46. By 1996, it had jumped to 4.21, and by 2000, it was sitting at a ridiculous 4.77. Home runs per game nearly doubled from the 1980s to the late 90s. Ballparks were getting smaller, the strike zone was shrinking, and rumors of performance enhancement were swirling around every clubhouse in America. Yet somehow, in this hitter-friendly hellscape where pitchers' careers went to die, only 4 men managed to cross that sacred 300 strikeout threshold during the entire decade. 4 pitchers who didn't just survive the 90s offensive onslaught, they absolutely dominated it, turning what should have been impossible into their personal playground. The first one to do it was Nolan Ryan, and he did it at an age when most pitchers are teaching Little League or selling insurance. By 1989, Nolan Ryan was supposed to be done, finished, a relic from a bygone era who should have been hanging up his cleats and heading into the broadcasting booth or maybe coaching some high school kids in Texas. He was 42 years old, absolutely ancient by pitcher standards, had thrown more innings than anyone in baseball history, and was facing a generation of hitters who were bigger, stronger, more advanced, and more dangerous than any he'd ever encountered before. Most guys his age were selling insurance, running Little League practices, or sitting in recliners complaining about how the game had changed. Nolan Ryan was still throwing 100-mile-per-hour fastballs and making grown men with million-dollar contracts look like scared children stepping into the batter's box for the very first time. At 6'2", with a delivery that looked like it might literally tear his right shoulder clean off his body, Ryan had already struck out more batters than anyone in baseball history. His 5,000th strikeout had come and gone. His 300th career win was in the rearview mirror. By every reasonable measure, he'd already cemented his Hall of Fame legacy and had nothing left to prove to anyone. But 1989 wasn't about padding statistics or chasing personal milestones. This was about proving that Father Time was just another overmatched hitter who couldn't catch up to his legendary heater. The Texas Rangers were mediocre at best, finishing 83 and 79 and barely staying above 500. The American League was absolutely loaded with offensive firepower. Guys like Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, Kirby Puckett, and Wade Boggs were putting up numbers that seemed to come straight from a fantasy baseball enthusiast's wildest dream. And Ryan, in his 22nd Major League season, was just getting warmed up for one of the most absurd individual seasons ever witnessed on a pitcher's mound. In 1989, Ryan struck out 301 batters in just 239 innings, becoming the oldest pitcher in Major League Baseball history to reach the 300 strikeout milestone. But the raw numbers only tell part of this incredible story. Ryan was doing this while posting a 3.20 ERA in an era where league average was approaching 3.90. He was dominating hitters who were supposed to have every advantage over a pitcher pushing 43 years old. His fastball was still regularly hitting triple digits well into the 9th inning of games. Radar guns would clock him at 100, 101, sometimes 102 miles per hour in situations where most pitchers half his age were already running on fumes and praying to get through the 7th inning. His curveball, that devastating 12-6 hammer that had been fooling hitters for over 2 decades, was still dropping off tables and leaving batters swinging at air. But what made Ryan's 1989 season truly legendary wasn't just the stuff, it was the psychological warfare he waged against every hitter who dared step into the box against him. Opposing hitters knew exactly what was coming. Everyone in the stadium knew Ryan threw 2 pitches, a fastball that could break bones and a curveball that defied physics. It didn't matter. You can't hit what you can't catch up to, and you can't time what you can't see clearly enough to track. Ryan recorded 16 games with double-digit strikeouts that season, including multiple performances where he struck out 15 or more batters in a single game. There were entire opposing lineups that looked absolutely helpless against him, swinging through fastballs and chasing curveballs in the dirt like they'd never seen professional pitching before. The defining moment of his season came on August 22nd against the Oakland Athletics, a team loaded with future Hall of Famers like Rickey Henderson, Jose Canseco, and Mark McGwire. Ryan struck out 13 batters over 8 innings, completely dismantling what was arguably the most potent offensive lineup in all of baseball. Watching 42-year-old Nolan Ryan make the Bash brothers look like little leaguers was a reminder that greatness transcends age, era, and circumstance. By the end of 1989, Ryan had not only reached 300 strikeouts, but had done so while posting the 5th best ERA in the American League and leading the majors in strikeouts per 9 innings. He finished third in Cy Young voting behind Brett Saberhagen and Dave Stewart. But anyone who watched him pitch that season knew they were witnessing something that might never happen again. Ryan proved that in an era defined by explosive offensive numbers and young power hitters, experience, determination, and otherworldly stuff could still dominate the game. His 1989 season was a masterclass in longevity and excellence, and it set the stage for what would become the most remarkable decade of 300 strikeout seasons in baseball history. But even Ryan's age-defying brilliance would pale in comparison to the raw, uncontrolled terror that Randy Johnson would unleash just 4 years later. Randy Johnson in 1993 was like watching a horror movie play out in real time, except the monster was real, stood 6 foot 10 inches tall, and threw a baseball harder than most people could even comprehend. If you thought 42-year-old Nolan Ryan was intimidating, Randy Johnson at his physical peak was absolutely terrifying in ways that made grown men question their career choices. This wasn't the refined, controlled Randy Johnson you saw systematically destroy the National League with Arizona in the early 2000s. This was raw, unrefined, barely controlled violence wrapped in a baseball uniform. Johnson was still figuring out his mechanics, still learning how to harness his otherworldly stuff, still discovering just how dominant he could be when everything clicked, and hitters across the American League were absolutely petrified every time his name appeared on the pitching rotation schedule. At 6 feet 10 inches tall, with arms that seemed to stretch from the pitcher's mound to home plate, Johnson's delivery was a study in controlled chaos. His fastball regularly touched 102 miles per hour, but it wasn't just the velocity that made him unhittable. It was the angle, the movement, and the sheer impossibility of picking up the ball out of his delivery. Left-handed hitters especially lived in constant fear, knowing that Johnson's slider looked like it was headed directly for their face before breaking sharply across the plate at the last possible second. The Seattle Mariners in 1993 were absolutely terrible, finishing 82-80 in what was supposed to be a rebuilding year. Johnson was single-handedly keeping them competitive, turning what should have been unwatchable baseball into must-see television every 5th day. When Johnson was scheduled to pitch, the Kingdome would fill up with fans who knew they were about to witness something special, something violent, something that might never be replicated again. In this era, where hitters were putting up numbers that belonged in record books and offensive statistics were going through the roof, Johnson struck out 308 batters in 255 innings, while posting a 3.24 ERA in the American League. But here's what made his 1993 season even more impressive and infinitely more terrifying. He did it while walking 99 batters, 99 walks. Most pitchers with that kind of control issue get sent down to AAA to work on their command and figure out how to throw strikes consistently. Johnson was so overpoweringly dominant, so impossibly difficult to make contact against, that it simply didn't matter if he occasionally missed the strike zone. Hitters couldn't make solid contact even when they knew he was struggling to find the plate. They were so intimidated by his presence and his stuff that they'd swing at pitches in the dirt and take fastballs down the middle of the plate. His delivery was so violent and unpredictable that opposing batters would bail out on pitches that ended up being perfectly located strikes. The psychological warfare was absolutely real. Hitters stepped into the batter's box already mentally defeated, knowing they were about to face someone who could throw a baseball through a brick wall and make it look effortless. Johnson recorded 12 games with 10 or more strikeouts that season, including a legendary 19 strikeout performance against the Oakland Athletics that that had fans questioning whether they were watching the same sport that other pitchers were playing. The A's had legitimate major league hitters, guys like Mark McGwire, Terry Steinbach, and Rickey Henderson, and Johnson made them look like they'd never seen a baseball in their lives. What made Johnson's 1993 season so historically significant wasn't just the raw strikeout numbers, it was the context in which he accumulated them. Offensive numbers were exploding across baseball. The year before, players hit 40 or more home runs 17 different times. In 1993, they did it 18 times. Hitters were locked in, dialed in, seeing the ball better than ever before, and putting up statistics that seemed to come from a different sport entirely. The league-wide ERA in 1993 was 4.21, nearly a full run higher than it had been just 6 years earlier. Pitchers everywhere were getting absolutely crushed by lineups that featured multiple 30 home run threats and hitters who could turn on any mistake and send it 450 feet. Johnson was not only surviving in this environment, he was completely dominating it, striking out 300-plus batters like it was still 1968 and pitchers held all the advantages. His slider was particularly devastating that season, a pitch that looked like a fastball out of the hand before breaking so sharply that hitters would start their swing and end up corkscrewing themselves into the ground. Left-handed hitters especially were completely hopeless against him, often looking like they were swinging underwater while Johnson's slider darted across the plate. The defining moment of Johnson's 1993 season came on June 24th against the Detroit Tigers, when he struck out 14 batters over 8 innings while allowing just 3 hits. The Tigers lineup included future Hall of Famer Tony Phillips and several other legitimate major league hitters, but they looked like a high school team trying to solve advanced calculus while being attacked by a tornado. Johnson finished second in Cy Young voting that year to Jack McDowell of the Chicago White Sox, who had better control statistics and more team success. But anyone who actually watched Johnson pitch in 1993 knew they were seeing something transcendent, something that might never be replicated in baseball history. His 308 strikeouts stood as a statement that even in baseball's most offensive-heavy era, when hitters had every conceivable advantage, truly elite pitching could still make grown men with million-dollar contracts look like scared children. Johnson proved that dominance wasn't about perfect control or surgical precision. Sometimes it was about sheer, overwhelming, terrifying stuff that left hitters with no realistic chance of success. But if you thought Johnson's controlled chaos was impressive, wait until you see what Curt Schilling did just 4 years later with surgical precision in an even more offensive environment. By 1997, Curt Schilling had completely transformed himself from a decent pitcher with good stuff into an absolute strikeout machine with surgical precision. But accomplishing what he did in 1997 was like trying to paint the Sistine Chapel during an earthquake while someone was shooting cannons at you. This was the absolute height of the offensive explosion. Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were launching baseballs into orbit on a nightly basis. Hitters were bigger and stronger than they'd ever been in baseball history, and pitchers across both leagues were getting absolutely obliterated by a lineup that seemed to come straight from another dimension. Schilling didn't just survive this hostile environment, he completely dominated it with a level of precision and control that seemed to defy everything happening around him in baseball. Playing for the Philadelphia Phillies, a team that was mediocre at best and finished a disappointing 68-94, Schilling struck out 319 batters in 254 innings pitched. But what made his season absolutely legendary wasn't just the raw number, though 319 strikeouts was the highest total by a pitcher between 1991 and 1998. It was the masterful way he accumulated those strikeouts while everything around him was falling apart. Unlike Randy Johnson's controlled chaos and overwhelming stuff, Schilling was surgical precision mixed with devastating secondary pitches. His approach was completely different from the intimidation factor that guys like Ryan and Johnson brought to the mound. Schilling attacked hitters with intelligence, location, and an arsenal of pitches that left batters guessing wrong more often than not. His four-seam fastball sat comfortably in the mid-90s, occasionally touching 97 miles per hour. But it wasn't the velocity that made him special, it was the command and the way he could locate it anywhere in the strike zone at any point in the count. But his slider was borderline unfair, a pitch that looked exactly like his fastball out of his hand before breaking so sharply and late that hitters would start their swing committed to hitting a fastball and end up swinging at a pitch that was 6 inches off the plate. Schilling recorded 15 games with double-digit strikeouts in 1997, including a stretch in August where he struck out 10 or more batters in 5 consecutive starts. During one particularly dominant 3-week period, he struck out 47 batters over 23 innings while posting a 1.17 ERA. This wasn't just good pitching, this was complete and utter domination in an era where domination was supposed to be impossible. The Philadelphia Phillies were absolutely brutal that season, losing 94 games and finishing dead last in the National League East. Schilling was literally the only reason people showed up to Veterans Stadium during the summer of 1997. When he was scheduled to pitch, you knew you were going to see something special, something worth the price of admission. When anyone else was on the mound, you knew the Phillies were probably going to get blown out by 5 or 6 runs. What made Schilling's 1997 season even more impressive was his incredible durability and old-school mentality in an era where pitch counts were becoming increasingly important to front offices. Schilling threw 254 innings and completed 7 games, including 2 shutouts. He wasn't just dominating hitters for 6 innings and handing the ball to the bullpen. He was going deep into games and finishing what he started the way pitchers were supposed to do it. His strikeout-to-walk ratio was absolutely absurd. 319 strikeouts to just 58 walks. That's a 5.5 to 1 ratio in a year where hitters were seeing the ball better than they had in decades, when offensive numbers were exploding across both leagues, and when most pitchers were struggling to maintain even a 2 to 1 ratio. Schilling wasn't wild like early Randy Johnson or overpowering like Nolan Ryan. He was throwing strikes and challenging hitters to make contact, knowing they couldn't. The defining moment of his 1997 season came on July 6th against the New York Mets at Veterans Stadium. Schilling struck out 16 batters in a complete game victory, totally dismantling a lineup that included future Hall of Famer Mike Piazza, John Olerud, and several other legitimate major league hitters. It was a masterclass in pitching that reminded everyone watching that even in the heart of the offensive era, great pitching could still completely dominate great hitting. His performance that day was surgical. He threw 129 pitches, 89 of them for strikes, and never walked a single batter. The Mets lineup had no answer for his slider, no solution for his fastball command, and no way to solve the puzzle he was presenting them every single at-bat. It was like watching a grand chess master play against elementary school children. Schilling finished 3rd in National League Cy Young voting that year, losing to Pedro Martinez and Greg Maddux, 2 of the greatest pitchers of all time who were having historically great seasons of their own. In any other year, 319 strikeouts with a 2.97 ERA might have easily won him the award. In 1997, it was just another incredible season in what was turning out to be an incredible era for the few pitchers talented enough to dominate it. But Schilling's precision and control, as impressive as they were, would look almost ordinary compared to what Pedro Martinez would do just 2 years later in what might have been the greatest single-season pitching performance in baseball history. Pedro Martinez in 1997 wasn't just dominant. He was playing a completely different sport than everyone else on the planet. At 5 foot 11 inches and 170 pounds soaking wet, Martinez looked like he should have been getting his lunch money stolen by the massive hitters he was facing every 5th day. Instead, he was making them look like Little League players who had somehow wandered onto a Major League Baseball field by mistake. This was the absolute peak of the steroid era, the height of offensive insanity, the moment when baseball's power numbers had become so cartoonish that they seemed to come from a different universe entirely. Home runs were flying out of ballparks at record rate. Offensive statistics were reaching levels that seemed mathematically impossible, and pitchers everywhere were getting destroyed by lineups that featured multiple 40 home run threats and hitters who could turn on any mistake pitch and send it 450 feet into the upper deck. The American League ERA in 1999 was a ridiculous 4.86, nearly 5 runs per game for the average pitcher. Teams were scoring runs in bunches. Offensive records were falling left and right, and most pitchers were praying just to get through 6 innings without giving up a crooked number. Pedro Martinez posted a 2.07 ERA while striking out 313 batters in just 213 innings pitched. Read that sentence again and let it sink in. A 2.07 ERA in the American League in 1999. It was like watching someone perform magic tricks that defied the laws of physics, like witnessing a master craftsman work with tools that no one else could even handle properly. Martinez didn't overpower hitters like Randy Johnson with triple-digit fastballs or intimidate them like Nolan Ryan with his legendary reputation. He dissected them with surgical precision, using an arsenal of pitches that seemed to come from different planets and leave hitters looking confused, frustrated, and completely helpless. His fastball set in the low 90s, occasionally touching 95. But it wasn't the velocity that made him special. It was the deception, the movement, and the way he could make it look exactly like his changeup until the very last millisecond. But his changeup was truly from another planet, a pitch that looked identical to his fastball out of the hand but arrived at home plate 10 to 12 miles per hour slower and with movement that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. Hitters would gear up for a 92 mile per hour fastball and get completely fooled by an 82 mile per hour changeup that would just drop out of the strike zone just as they were committing to their swing. The result was swing after swing at thin air, strikeout after strikeout, and at-bat after at-bat, where major league hitters looked like they'd never seen professional pitching before in their lives. His curveball was equally devastating, a perfect 12-6 breaker that dropped off the table just as hitters were about to make contact, and his control was absolutely pinpoint perfect. Martinez walked just 37 batters all season while striking out 313. That's an 8.5 to 1 strikeout to walk ratio in the most offensive-heavy season in baseball history, a ratio that most pitchers couldn't achieve in controlled batting practice, let alone in real life against the best hitters on the planet. The Boston Red Sox weren't even particularly good in 1999. They went 94-68 and lost in the American League Division Series to the Cleveland Indians. But when Martinez was scheduled to pitch, it felt like the Red Sox had a guaranteed victory, like they were playing with house money and couldn't possibly lose. He went 23-4 with a whip of .92 in a season when most pitchers were getting shelled on a nightly basis. Martinez recorded 12 games with 10 or more strikeouts that season, including multiple performances where he struck out 15 or more batters in a single game. But the defining moment of his 1999 season came on September 10th against the New York Yankees at Fenway Park. The Yankees had won 98 games that year and featured one of the most potent, disciplined offensive lineups in all of baseball. Guys like Derek Jeter, Bernie Williams, Tino Martinez, and Paul O'Neill, who rarely struck out and almost never looked overmatched. Martinez struck out 17 of them over 9 innings in a complete game victory that left 34,000 fans at Fenway Park on their feet, and the Yankees looking like a high school team that had somehow been scheduled to play against a major league ace. It wasn't just the strikeouts that made this performance legendary. It was the way Martinez completely dominated every aspect of the game. He threw 130 pitches, 92 of them for strikes, walked just one batter, and never allowed the Yankees to mount any serious threat. Every pitch seemed perfectly located, every sequence seemed perfectly planned, and every result seemed inevitable. The Yankees hitters, who were used to working deep counts and grinding out professional at-bats, found themselves swinging and missing at pitches they thought they could handle. They'd take what looked like a perfect fastball to hit, only to realize it was a changeup that was about to drop out of the strike zone. They'd gear up for a changeup and get blown away by a fastball that seemed to rise as it approached the plate. What made Martinez's 1999 season transcendent wasn't just the incredible numbers, though a 2.07 ERA and 313 strikeouts would be remarkable in any era. It was the degree of difficulty involved in achieving those numbers. Doing what he did in 1999 was like shooting a perfect round of golf during a hurricane when someone was shooting fireworks at you and playing loud music in your ear. The conditions were impossible. The competition was juiced up and locked in like never before. The ballparks were smaller, the strike zone was tighter, and Martinez was still completely untouchable. He made the impossible look routine and the routine look impossible. Martinez won the Cy Young Award unanimously that season, becoming just the second pitcher in American League history to receive all first-place votes. He also finished second in MVP voting as a pitcher in the American League in 1999, in the heart of the offensive explosion. That tells you everything you need to know about how historically special this season was and how dominant he was compared to everyone else playing. the same sport. Martinez proved that in an era completely defined by offensive explosion and power hitting, elite pitching could still be the most dominant force in baseball. His 1999 season was a masterpiece, painted in the middle of complete chaos, a work of art created while everything around him was falling apart, and it stands as arguably the greatest individual pitching season in modern baseball history. His dominance that year was so complete, so overwhelming, so historically significant that it redefined what was possible for a pitcher in the modern era and reminded everyone that greatness can transcend any circumstance, any era, and any set of disadvantages. These four pitchers didn't just reach 300 strikeouts during the 1990s. They accomplished something that should have been mathematically impossible given the era they were competing in. The 1990s featured smaller ballpark, juiced baseballs, stronger hitters, performance enhancement rumors, and offensive explosions that made pitching an absolute nightmare for everyone except those four exceptional talents. The degree of difficulty they overcame cannot be overstated. While other pitchers were getting lit up nightly and seeing their careers end prematurely, while ERAs were skyrocketing across both leagues, while home run records were falling left and right, these four men reached a level of individual dominance that seemed to defy the basic rules of their era. Nolan Ryan did it at 42 years old, an age when most pitchers are long retired, proving that experience and determination could overcome time itself. Randy Johnson did it while still learning to control his otherworldly stuff, showing that raw talent and intimidation could dominate even the most advanced hitters. Curt Schilling did it with surgical precision for a terrible team, demonstrating that intelligence and location could solve any lineup. And Pedro Martinez did it during the peak of the steroid era, while giving up a foot and 50 pounds to most hitters, proving that technique and deception could overcome any physical disadvantage. These weren't just great individual seasons. They were acts of defiance against the era itself, statements that true greatness can transcend any set of circumstances, any historical context, with any level of adversity. We may never see anything quite like it again. The game has changed dramatically. The approaches have evolved completely, and the specific circumstances that made these achievements so historically remarkable may never align again in exactly the same way. But for one incredible decade, these four pitchers reminded us that even in baseball's most offensive-heavy era, when hitters held every conceivable advantage, elite pitching could still make grown men with million-dollar contracts look like children stepping into the batter's box for the very first time. And that's exactly why they'll never, ever be forgotten. If you enjoyed this documentary looking into recent baseball history and want to see more incredible sports stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest. Drop a comment below and let us know which of these four legendary pitchers impressed you the most, or tell us about other impossible baseball achievements you'd like us to cover. And if this video amazed you as much as these pitchers amazed their opponents, share it with your fellow baseball fans. They'll thank you for it.